Hi, this is Councilman Fikowski for AP Gov Review, and in our final part of Congress in Unit 4, we're going to be looking at some of the other things that Congress does aside from just working on bills. Now, voting, of course, is very important, especially in the House of Representatives and Senate, and for a vote to go underway, you need to have a quorum, meaning a majority of congresspersons within the House or the Senate must be present. And you don't need to know this. Just more of an FYI as to the methods of voting. Historically, you have your voice yay or nay, you have your standing vote. Now, the House in particular has transitioned to a recorded electronic vote, whereas the roll call is seen in the Senate. But more importantly, the four positions of Congress. If you're a congressperson and you have a bill coming before you in the full House or the full Senate, there are one of four different ways that you can vote. You have trustee, where you're voting based on merit, based on what you believe is important, what you believe to be necessary to pass, or important to become a law. In contrast, you have what's known as a partisan. Think of in terms of partisanship that you're favoring one particular ideology, and typically that's the way that the party votes. There are advantages to that because the more loyal you are to your party, remember, the better chance you have of getting on a more prestigious committee. And remember, where you have more prestigious committees, you're going to have more power, more influence, and you have a better chance of getting reelected as an incumbent. There's also the position of a delegate, and that's, of course, the way that the people would want in your own district. So if you know something's popular, they want a bill to pass, or something that would certainly benefit your district, you're going to want to vote that way. Or if, let's say, the majority of the people in your district are pro-gun rights, you're probably going to want to vote that way, especially as a delegate. And then you have what's known as a politico, and that's a combination of both the delegate and the partisan. Sort of you take a mixed approach, and hopefully, if you're the congressperson, the two sort of align as a partisan and a delegate. All right, so party influence, of course, party leaders, that being either the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate or, of course, the Speaker of the House and the House of Representatives, cannot force a party member to vote in any particular way, right? Each particular congressperson has his or her own vote. But most of the time, congresspersons are going to vote along party lines, which of course is going to enhance party polarization, where you have one political party really dead set against another. So typically, let's say in the Senate, if you have 40 Republicans and 60 Democrats, you might see a vote of party polarization with 60 Democrats voting one way and 40 voting the other way. So that's where you really see the polarization factor. Now, of course, remember, as I was just talking about, the importance of the committee selection, that the greater party loyalty, the better chance you have on serving on a more prestigious committee. Now, certainly when we look at your constituency versus ideology, the prime determinant of whether a member is going to vote one way or another comes down to one's ideology. Basically, it's going to come down to, if you're conservative, conservatives are going to vote one way, and if you're a liberal, you're going to vote the other. On most issues that are not the most important, legislators do tend, and not necessarily tend, but can be more inclined to ignore a constituency's opinion. So for example, if you're representing a New York City, which has very little agriculture there in your district, you might vote one way that, on let's say, an agricultural bill that has no relevance for New York City, however the heck you want, because again, your members, your constituents are not going to care. But of course, on controversial issues, members of Congress are, of course, going to be wise to heed the constituent opinion as the delegate, as we just talked about with these four positions of Congress. But typically, they are going to become ideologues in the sense that you're going to vote along ideology, which again is going to come down to party polarization on many controversial issues. Now, the president, even though the president has no role in terms of drafting a bill, because of course only a member of Congress can do that, presidents can attempt to persuade Congress that what they want is what Congress wants as well. And they do have influence over Congress. Sometimes some of the informal powers, as we'll learn about in Unit 4 in the presidential subunit, is that the president has these informal powers, one of which being a chief legislature, right? Because you are the president of the United States, you're going to get more airtime, you have more influence, media covers you at a higher rate as opposed to all 535 members of Congress. So more academics increasingly have seen the president as a facilitator who works within Congress. If a particular bill is important to a president, more often than not, you might see the president meeting with certain members of Congress or meeting with a caucus within Congress. Good example being with the Affordable Care Act with President Obama. One of the ways he was able to get that through was by convincing members of Congress to pass it through. And he met with a number of congressmen and women, and ultimately it did pass. Now, there are also non-legislative duties of Congress, as I was talking about before, and we've mentioned in other videos, that being, of course, legislative oversight over bureaucracy, holding hearings. They also do have the power of funding as well as defunding agencies. So if they think an agency is not doing a good job, they can easily defund it, because one of the major roles that Congress has is the power of the purse. Certainly very important there. Also, confirmation of presidential appointments. Also, treaties with foreign nations, that specifically being, of course, the Senate. Impeachment being with the House, and the trial being with the Senate, federal judges and government officials. So you have oversight, as you see in this political cartoon. So they can hold the bureaucracy, they can also hold the president accountable if there is wrongdoing. Let's continue into part 7. And also dealing with Congress, they can pass what are known as resolutions. Not a huge topic that you may see, I don't think, on the AP Gov exam, but just in case, I'll just briefly mention it. You have what are known as simple resolutions, and can be as simple, and that is done in both the House and the Senate, where it can be a simple rule of regulation. It can also be as simple, no pun intended, as wishing a particular member of Congress happy birthday. Along with simple resolutions, you have concurrent resolutions, which are procedural matters from both houses, again, dealing with procedures and rules, and again, both houses are involved there. And then lastly, joint resolutions, which requires the approval of both houses and a signature of the president needed. A good example of this was after September 11th, Congress issued a joint resolution that authorized the president to take military action, as well as condemning the attack. So again, these are relatively minor functions of Congress, but something you should certainly be aware of. All right, so lobbyists and interest groups are also going to be important and play a role in the congressional process, especially with bills. There are over 35,000 registered lobbyists, and certainly the bigger the issue, you're going to have more lobbyists on it. Good example would be the contentious nature involving guns and whether or not there should be restrictions, and we've seen that play out over the past couple of years. Lobbyists, of course, are going to try to influence the legislators' votes, especially on committees, so if you can pigeonhole it, even better for those lobbyists. Lobbyists can be ignored, they can be shunned, they can even be regulated, which they are to some extent on Congress, but some say lobbyists should really have no part in the congressional process. Now, as terrible of a rap that lobbyists have, and might even rightfully deserve, lobbyists can provide some useful information to Congress people, especially when it's dealing with more complex issues, let's say for finance. Again, most of the time, lobbyists might have a more of a pernicious influence on the legislative process, but with AP Gov, they're not really looking for you to take an opinion on lobbyists. They simply want you to know what lobbyists do, and really that lobbyists do play a role on the congressional process. So make sure that you're not really saying lobbyists are the worst people out there. You want to take a very neutral political science type approach on that. So ultimately, it is a combination of lobbyists as well as other influences on the congressperson's vote. Now, Congress in the scope of government, really the more policies Congress works on, the more ways it can serve the constituents, and the more programs that get created, the bigger the government gets, and that has been an issue that conservatives have versus liberals in terms of trying to narrow down the scope of government, whereas liberals tend to, generally speaking, want government to be bigger and have more control and regulation over many areas of the United States. Ultimately, you can have contradiction in public opinion. Again, one of the most difficult things about being in Congress is that you might have a wide range of opinions within your district or especially your state. Take, for example, California, an enormous state where you have a wide range of opinions. So you certainly can't service everyone favorably. In addition, what's really interesting is that everybody tends to hate Congress, but, they love their own congressperson. So that's one of the great paradoxes, is that if everybody really hates Congress, then why do the same people in Congress keep getting voted in and in? Well, it's because the local districts really like their congressperson. So that's one of the issues of Congress today. So in summary, certainly members of Congress make policy. They are in charge. Certainly they have influences from lobbyists and interest groups. They do have a major incumbency advantage in the House of Representatives. You're looking at 95%. Senate roughly around 80% or higher, depending on the election year. Congress is very complex, as you saw the number of complexities in the previous videos of a bill becoming a law. And of course, presidents, parties, constituencies, interest groups are all going to be affecting how a legislator votes on a particular bill. All right, let's end with a review question. Which of the following is an example of congressional oversight? Take a moment to look through the choices. And if you said the first one, A, holding hearings for review of an executive agency's activities, that's exactly what it does, whether it's with misconduct, whether it's reviewing the budget. Remember, Congress is what authorizes a bureaucracy to exist, so it can hold hearings on it as it seems necessary to do so.